Hello everyone, welcome to Tattoo Masters Academy UK. We're going to be looking at one of our designs, which is a tree of life concept. It's a fine line piece, mainly focusing on our lining and a little bit of shading for depth. Now my client wanted this above her ankle, which is typically quite good skin to tattoo on. It's quite nice because you don't have to stretch as much because most of the time the skin is already quite taut. However, it is of course super important that we do keep our stretch and that we're constantly watching how the skin is reacting. Now, I'm using a 1R needle, which is the most traumatic needle for the skin. It is a bugpin liner that I'm using. So again, nice and fine, and it will give beautiful crisp lines. With a 1RL, I'm trying to keep this at an angle of 90 degrees as much as possible. Now, you really do have to be confident with your needle depth when it comes to using your finer needles and lesser configurations, because if you do go too deep, there is a greater chance of pigment migration or blowout almost straight away, as well as damage to the skin, including scarring, because it is the most traumatic needle. Now, I like to float my needle. I much prefer to do this because I'm quite comfortable with my hand pressure, and also I'm very comfortable with my machine. The voltage I have this machine on is 8 volts for my lining. It works well for me. And I have a throw of 3.9 for lining. Now, I find that I do work quite quickly. I have to add, this video has been sped up because the whole process itself did take longer. And I must stress to you, take your time when you're working on your tattoo designs, especially when you're starting out. You don't need to rush through them at all, especially when it comes to doing your finer, daintier pieces where perhaps there's not much room for error. However, taking your time with any design and building up, it gives your client more confidence. It will allow you to breathe into the design. I think that's one of the most important things when you're first starting out. Take a couple of deep breaths, especially if it's lining. You want to make sure that you're nice and calm, nice and steady. And a key tip for me is lean on the client as much as possible, or lean on your couch, your bed, whatever you're working on. Just put as much weight into it as you can, and this will keep you nice and steady. Now, as I'm working, I use my pinky finger to also steady me, and that really helps when I'm floating the needle rather than riding the tube. And I do tend to find that floating the needle, I get, for me personally, a much better result. I feel more in control of my needle depth and that I'm not going to be going too deep. However, you do need to ensure that you've got some kind of way of keeping yourself nice and sturdy. If possible, depending on the area you're working on, I always look for a 3-point contact. So this will usually be my elbows in, locked to the side of my ribs. Now this very much depends on the area you're working on. Here you can see I haven't been able to do that. However, I do have my couch to lean my elbow on. I then have my pinky finger that is giving me stability, and I've also locked my wrist. So I'm making sure that certainly when I'm lining, I'm trying not to use my wrist at all, but actually move from my elbow and using my pinky finger to keep that nice and sturdy. The angle that I'm trying to work at is as 90 degrees as possible to the skin. Now I find this is especially important if you're using your bugpin needles and also your lesser configurations, because the more accurate you are on the skin, A, it will mean the design looks a lot more flawless, but B, it also means that you're at a better chance of being at the optimum depth within the skin. So whilst lining, I will dab my piece and I will try my hardest not to wipe. Here you can see that the ink has spread quite a bit. However, what you can't see is that once I've dabbed the skin, I can actually see my line through the ink, and I'm confident enough to be able to continue without having to wipe over. I try my hardest when I'm lining to not wipe over using any green soap or anything until I've completed my piece. Once it's all been lined, I will wipe over with green soap, dry the area, just pat dry it, and then I will go on and do any touch-ups and then move on to the other aspects of the design. So now I've just sped this video up just so that you're aware. I'm continuing just to line the petals, line the branches, and I'm working in areas that I know that I'm not going to smudge with my stretching hand and also with my pinky finger. So I am switching from side to side. You would always usually work from the bottom upwards on a piece, but with the branches, with the different aspects of the leaves with this design, I've decided that I'm much more comfortable still working from bottom to top, but also getting in the areas that I know that I'm not going to smudge. And you'll make that judgment call when you're working on your design, but also remember, you will have traced that design, you will have worked on it, looked at it before you've even gotten onto the skin. So you'll know your pattern of working and your method. A big tip of mine is that you prepare before your client comes in so that you've got a working plan and a knowledge of where it is you're going to be going. So now that I've wiped off with the green soap, I've just applied a little bit more petroleum jelly to the area just for some more glide, and I'm just touching up any tiny little areas that I feel need to be worked in a little bit more. Now, I'm not working at the same pressure when I'm doing this. I'm just purely scratching in anything very lightly that I feel needs a little bit more depth and a little bit more consistency to the lines. Now, this is totally fine for you to do so long as you adjust your pressure. So after wiping over, I did switch over to a 3-round liner. Now this is because I'm going to pop in a little bit of whip shading into the tattoo design before I then move over to a mag needle just to get a little bit more depth of shading. So I've just sped this up further for you. What I'm doing now is, again, I'm just popping in some extra little branches, some extra leaves, getting the finer little details in, as well as shading areas of the design to give it some depth. So here I'm using my 3RL just to pack in the black. Now it's such a small tight area that you can get away with a small round liner in order to be able to do this. If it was a much larger area, I would certainly be switching over to a round shader, or again, depending on the design, a mag. But for packing in that black area there, my 3RL was perfectly sufficient. And because the configuration and the needles are much tightly grouped together, it means that I can get into those tight little corners of, say, the bird's wings and the bird's beaks. So here I've switched over to a 5-round mag. This again is a bugpin diameter, and I'm just getting in my finer shading. For my shading, I am using a grey wash. I've diluted my black down, and I've got a dark tone, a medium and a light tone. But I didn't want to overdo it with this piece, as it is meant to be quite a nice fine design, so try to leave as much negative space in there as possible. So this is a completed piece. If you like this tutorial, if you found it helpful watching, then please do hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our channel for more tutorials.